It all started with a single gunshot, and by the time the smoke cleared, hundreds of Lakota men, women, and children lay dead in the snow-covered plains of South Dakota. It was supposed to be just another cold morning in December 1890, but what happened at Wounded Knee would become one of the deadliest mass shootings in US history. The Battle of Wounded Knee, part of what the US military referred to as the Pine Ridge Campaign, took place on December 29th, 1890, and it marked the violent culmination of centuries of displacement, broken treaties, and the rising tension between native nations in the expanding United States. This wasn't an isolated event. It was more like a brutal final chapter in a long campaign to suppress indigenous resistance, sovereignty, and identity. But why did it happen? What led the US Army to slaughter the Lakota Sioux? How did they justify it? And more disturbingly, how did they cover it up? Welcome to Unveiled History. In the years living up to 1890, the Lakota Sioux were living through what can only be described as a slow-motion tragedy. On the Standing Rock and Pine Ridge reservations just west of Aberdeen, life for over the 10,000 Lakota living there was a daily battle for survival. After the discovery of gold in the Black Hills in 1874, a gold rush of white settlers flooded into the Dakota Territory, violating every agreement the US had made. Treaties were torn apart like paper in the wind, and the Lakota's sacred lands were swallowed up by greedy hands. Then came the destruction of their lifeblood, the buffalo. These animals were more than food. They were part of the Lakota soil. But now, the herds were gone, nearly wiped to extinction, thanks to a strategy that aimed to starve the spirit of the people who depended on them. Bison hunting had stopped by the early 1880s. The great herds were nearly wiped out by settlers, railroads, and commercial slaughter. The last of them survived only in Yellowstone National Park, a few private ranches, and almost tragically in zoos and travelling Wild West shows. And yet, in 1890, during the drought, a few of the shaggy beasts suddenly reappeared on one of the Sioux reservations in South Dakota. Had the spirits returned them? Stories like this spread like wildfire, igniting unanswered questions and reviving an ancient faith. By this time, the Lakota were no longer hunters. They were prisoners on government reservations, trapped by poverty, hunger, and laws that banned even the most sacred ceremonies. Historian Donovan Sprague, a Lakota himself and a descendant of both survivors and victims of what was to come, described it plainly. The Lakota were very distraught at the time. They lost massive amounts of land under the Dawes Allotment Act of 1887, and many were still dealing with their recent surrender to the reservation system. In the West, drought had baked the earth bare. The reservations, which were already carved out of the poor quality land, offered little game and even fewer edible wild plants. The grass had been stripped bare by cattle and sheep, most of which weren't even owned by the Lakota, but by white ranchers. What little remained withered in the heat. Starvation had once again circled the camps. As if that wasn't enough, epidemics of measles, whooping cough, and influenza began to tear through the camps. It was in this despair that a new religion began to rise, a movement that promised the return of the old world, where buffalo roamed again and the white man was gone. That movement was called the Ghost Dance. By the winter of 1890, nearly one-third of the Lakota had embraced it. From the deep southwest to Alberta, Canada, from the Sierra Nevada to eastern Oklahoma, all the way to southern Utah, Arizona, and Idaho, Indians danced. And this wasn't just about dancing. It was the Ghost Dance, a spiritual revival that had first emerged in Nevada around 1870, and then returned with force in 1889, revived by the Pariete prophet Wovoka. In Nevada, 1,000 Shoshons danced through the night. As the eastern sky paled, people's cries rang out with, "Christ has come." They fell to the ground, weeping, singing, trembling, believing that through this ritual, their ancestors would return, the land would be healed, and their suffering would end. They even wore white muslin shirts, which they believed could protect them from danger, and even deflect bullets. It was faith. It was desperation. But above all, it was a way to survive, spiritually, when everything else had been stripped away. And while some dismissed early whispers of a Messiah hidden in the Montana mountains, the rumour only grew. By the fall of 1890, US authorities were watching closely and they were afraid. Indians are dancing in the snow and are wild and crazy, telegraphed federal agent Daniel F. Royer from South Dakota's Pine Ridge Reservation, November 1890. We need protection, and we need it now. To the US government, this wasn't a religious ceremony, it was a rebellion. Or at least, that's how they wanted to see it. I suppose the authorities did think they were crazy, but they weren't, a Lakota later said. Still, the government banned the ghost dance and mobilized the largest military force since the Civil War. General Nelson Miles, from the same 7th Cavalry annihilated at the Battle of Little Bighorn just 14 years earlier, was sent to the Prairie with orders to arrest tribal leaders promoting the dance. The movement was sweeping across 30 Indian reservations, but it found its deepest roots along the Lakota Sioux. The authorities zeroed in on one name, in particular, Chief Sitting Bull, the same Sitting Bull who had led the offensive that decimated General Custer at Custer's last stand in 1876. By 1890, Sitting Bull was technically a prisoner of war, held at the Standing Rock Agency, but had been allowed to travel. In 1885, he even performed with Buffalo Bill Cody's Wild West show, but now, back at Standing Rock, he had welcomed ghost dancers into his camp. To US officials, that was the last straw. What disturbed them the most wasn't just the dance, but the spiritual intensity of it. Men, women, and children, sick or strong, held hands in a great circle, turning clockwise, sometimes for hours, sometimes through the night. Trees stood at the centre, often a young cottonwood, hung with offerings like ribbons, symbols, and sometimes even an American flag. The dances began with a prayer, maybe passed around a sacred potion, and when they rose, singing, unaccompanied by drums or instruments, uttering what one observer called a sort of plaintive cry, well calculated to the arrest of the ear of the sympathetic. White observers were stunned, and many were terrified. One federal agent called it warfare disguised as religion. Another said the dancers had become exhausted, out of control, and dangerous. The dance is indecent, demoralizing, and disgusting, one exclaimed. But the ghost dancers were not crazy. They were not dangerous. They were grieving. They were searching for healing, for lost culture, for community. As one Sioux evangelist said, the ghost dance invited us to be Indians again. The tragic chain of events leading to the Wounded Knee Massacre didn't start with bullets, it started with fear. On September 15th, 1890, on the Standing Rock Reservation, Indian police arrived with orders. Arrest Chief Sitting Bull, but Sitting Bull, respected, defiant, and symbolic of the Lakota resistance, would never stand trial. In the chaos that followed, he was killed. Word spread like wildfire. The Lakota knew more bloodshed was coming. Fearing for their lives, Chief Spotted Elk, also known as Chief Bigfoot, and Sitting Bull's half-brother, gathered his people, many of them elders, women, and children, and began a desperate journey. They fled Standing Rock, heading over 200 miles south to the Pine Ridge Reservation in the bitter cold of a South Dakota winter. But they would never make it. On December 28th, US cavalry caught up with them near the frozen banks of Wounded Knee Creek, a winding stream in the Badlands of southwest South Dakota. Spotted Elk, stricken with pneumonia, was so sick he couldn't sit up, let alone walk. Still, the army arrested him. They surrounded the Lakota camp, pointing Hotchkiss guns, deadly, rapid-fire artillery, down from a nearby ridge. They weren't just watching, they were waiting. Then, at dawn on December 29th, 1890, the final order came from Colonel James Forsyth. Disarm them, move them out. Soldiers swept through the camp, confiscating 38 rifles. They kept searching, tent by tent, man by man. Tensions were rising. No old men were found armed, but one medicine man, Yellow Bird, began to chant and dance. He stirred the young man, invoking the power of the ghost dance and the protection of the sacred ghost shirts, believed to be bulletproof. And this is where all the chaos erupted. A young Lakota man, Black Coyote, refused to give up his rifle. He was deaf and didn't understand the soldier's order. "Black Coyote is deaf," someone cried out. "He cannot hear you." But the soldiers didn't stop. They grabbed him. In the scuffle, his gun went off. A single shot. Then all hell broke loose. Lakota warriors, some hiding weapons under blankets, fired at the soldiers. The 7th Cavalry responded with a deafening storm of gunfire, rifles and revolvers, and those Hotchkiss guns rained destruction into the camp. And the massacre began. Spotted Elk, still lying helpless, was shot down where he lay. Children, moments earlier playing leapfrog, were gunned down. Through clouds of smoke and dust, women and children fled into a nearby ravine, but even then, they weren't safe. "Remember Custer," one soldier shouted. When the smoke cleared, the earth was soaked in blood. Bodies littered the snow, some huddled together as if still trying to protect one another. Others were found miles away, gunned down as they fled. Soldiers even stripped sacred ghost shirts from the dead, trophies of war. At least 150 Lakota were killed, though historians like Donovan Sprague say the true toll may be twice as high. Among the dead were women, children, and the sick and elderly, 2/3 of the victims. 25 US soldiers also died, mostly from friendly fire. The dead were buried in a mass grave, their bodies first laid beneath Christmas decorations in a nearby church. Some survivors were jailed and later forced into Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. 20 soldiers would go on to receive the Medal of Honor, the highest and most prestigious award in the US military, for their role in what the government once framed as a battle. Years later, survivor Black Elk said, "A people's dream died there." In 1973, Wounded Knee saw blood again, during a 71-day protest by the American Indian movement, ending with 2 more native lives lost. If this video really touched you, kindly support this channel by liking the video and hitting the subscribe button, and tell us your thoughts about this event in the comments section. Stay tuned for more videos.